We live in a world where niceness is often confused with kindness, where being agreeable is mistaken for being good. But here's the truth grounded in neuroscience and psychology. If you're nice to everyone all the time, you're not being kind, you're being dishonest. Not just with others, but with yourself. Let's clarify something important. Being respectful is non-negotiable. But being nice, that constant smiling, people-pleasing, boundary-erasing behavior is often a sign of suppressed emotions, chronic stress, and a dysregulated nervous system. It's not a virtue, it's a liability. From a neurological standpoint, chronic niceness often stems from heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region responsible for monitoring social errors and emotional pain. When this area is hyperactive, people become hypersensitive to disapproval. They overcorrect. They suppress truth. They choose peace over progress. And over time, they lose themselves. The cost of chronic niceness: when you're too nice, your brain is constantly in a state of anticipatory stress. You monitor everyone's reactions, internalize every criticism, and rehearse every possible negative outcome. This activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, leading to elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep, poor digestion, and weakened immunity. That's not kindness. That's self-abandonment in the name of being liked. This is not how high performers, deep thinkers, or emotionally regulated people operate. They know that disagreement is not conflict. They understand that having an opinion, one grounded in reason and experience, isn't aggression. It's integrity. You were not designed to be a doormat. Your nervous system wasn't built to carry the weight of everyone's expectations. The human brain functions best when it has clarity, boundaries, and the freedom to express truth. The biology of boundaries: when you stop being nice to everyone, something powerful happens in the brain. You activate what neuroscientists call self-referential thinking, the ability to process your own thoughts, beliefs, and values without constant external validation. This strengthens the medial prefrontal cortex, a region associated with identity, resilience, and emotional regulation. You begin to operate from internal authority, not external approval. When you say no to someone else, your brain actually reinforces your sense of agency through a spike in dopaminergic tone, a signal that says, "I just made a choice aligned with my values." That internal congruence leads to stronger mental health, more stable mood, and increased confidence over time. Saying no is not rudeness, it's cognitive alignment. The myth of being liked: most people who are chronically nice operate under a delusion that being liked is the same as being respected. It's not. In fact, studies in social cognition reveal that individuals who are too agreeable often rank lower in perceived competence and leadership potential. Why? Because people subconsciously trust those who are clear and assertive, not those who always say yes. The truth is, the more you try to please everyone, the less anyone takes you seriously. Niceness might get you invited to the table, but authenticity is what earns you a seat. There's a name for people who maintain their integrity even when it's uncomfortable: leaders. Why you need to trigger discomfort: if you've never made anyone uncomfortable with your honesty, you're not being honest enough. And if you've never felt anxious while setting a boundary, you're not setting real ones. Discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a neurological signal that you're forging a new pattern, one where your nervous system is learning to tolerate truth, rejection, and self-respect. It's a form of neuroplasticity. Every time you say no, every time you assert a boundary, every time you speak with clarity, instead of approval-seeking softness, you're wiring your brain for autonomy. That's how change happens: through repetition, friction, and emotional regulation. You don't rewire your brain through niceness, you do it through courage. The power of controlled exposure. In neuroscience, there's a principle called graded exposure, a technique used to overcome fear and anxiety by gradually facing discomfort in controlled ways. Apply this to your social life. You've always been the nice one. Start by saying no to low-stakes requests. Let someone else be upset, watch your brain panic, and then watch it calm down. You're not responsible for their emotions. Then increase the stakes. Speak up when someone crosses a line. Give real feedback. Decline that meeting. Exit the toxic conversation. Break the habit of apologizing for your existence. With each act, your brain learns that honesty is not death. Rejection is not death. Disapproval is not death. Truth is survival. Replace niceness with precision. The opposite of niceness is not cruelty, it's clarity. Be precise with your language. Be thoughtful with your actions. But stop muting yourself to maintain the illusion of harmony. That illusion is costing you your mental health, your energy, your creativity, and your sense of self. Psychological resilience is built on tension, not peacekeeping. You were not born to fit in. You were born to be a distinct voice, a precise signal in a noisy world. That requires neural discipline. That requires emotional friction. That requires saying things that may not be well received but are undeniably real. Rewire or repeat. You have two options: rewire your patterns or repeat your past. Stop being nice to everyone. It's not your job to keep the world emotionally comfortable. It's your responsibility to live in alignment with your values, your voice, and your vision. When your nervous system realizes you no longer need to be liked to feel safe, that's when you're finally free. Free to think clearly, free to speak honestly, free to live purposefully. So train your brain. Regulate your breath, ground your body. Set your boundaries, and let the world recalibrate around your truth. Because it's not about being nice, it's about being real. And your brain, your health, and your future are depending on it. You've been told your whole life that being nice is a strength, that it's the right thing to do, that it will open doors, build bridges, and keep everyone happy. But what if I told you that chronic niceness, always saying yes, constantly avoiding conflict, smiling through discomfort, nodding in agreement while your inside scream no isn't a strength at all? What if I told you that it's a malfunction, a dysregulation, a misfiring of your nervous system, trying to keep you safe in all the wrong ways? The truth is, many people who appear overly nice are not emotionally secure, they're emotionally overwhelmed. Their nervous systems have learned that safety comes not through authenticity, but through compliance. Somewhere in their life, whether through trauma, conditioning, or repeated social reinforcement, their brain made a silent agreement: stay agreeable, and you'll stay safe. So they do. They say yes when they mean no. They apologize even when they've done nothing wrong. They laugh at jokes that hurt. They tolerate environments that drain them. Not because they are kind-hearted, but because deep down they are afraid. And their nervous system is locked in a pattern of chronic stress and appeasement. The nervous system has two primary operating states: the sympathetic state, also known as fight or flight, and the parasympathetic state, also called rest and digest. But there's a third, often misunderstood state called the freeze or fawn response. This is where chronic niceness lives. It's where the system doesn't fight, doesn't flee, it fawns. It seeks approval, avoids confrontation, becomes overly accommodating. This fawn response is not about peace, it's about survival. It's the brain's strategy for reducing perceived threat through submission, through appeasement, through invisibility. When someone is chronically nice, their anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in error detection and emotional regulation, is often hyperactive. This means they're hypersensitive to potential rejection, to social disapproval, to perceived interpersonal failure. They anticipate judgment even before it arrives. Their brain is constantly scanning for cues. Did I upset them? Was that too direct? Did I offend? And this constant internal surveillance puts them in a state of ongoing sympathetic arousal. That's why chronic niceness often leads to fatigue, burnout, anxiety, and even autoimmune disorders. The system was not built to stay activated forever. It needs recovery. It needs congruence. It needs truth. But instead of regulating, these individuals double down. They people please more. They overfunction in relationships. They hold back their own needs, believing that keeping everyone else comfortable will finally bring peace. Yet, ironically, they rarely feel peaceful. Their bodies are tense. Their sleep is shallow. Their thoughts race. Their sense of self erodes. That's not peace. That's internal chaos dressed up as cooperation. We must understand that chronic niceness is a maladaptive coping mechanism rooted in early neurowiring. For many, this pattern begins in childhood. If you grew up in a home where expressing your truth led to punishment, rejection, or withdrawal of love, your brain learned to associate honesty with danger. If speaking up got you yelled at, ignored, or made into the problem, your developing nervous system learned that compliance was the only safe option. And over time, that compliance became a personality trait. You were praised for being easy, for not causing trouble, for making others feel good. But deep down, your authenticity was exiled. This wiring continues into adulthood. You enter friendships, workplaces, relationships, and the pattern persists. You become the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who absorbs the discomfort of others while hiding your own. Your smile becomes a mask. Your politeness becomes a cage. You don't set boundaries because you don't feel entitled to. You don't speak up because you were trained not to. And you don't get angry not outwardly because somewhere in your neurobiology, anger equals abandonment. So you swallow it. You suppress. You stay nice, but suppression is not the same as regulation. Suppression is the act of burying what's real to maintain a false sense of order. It's a short-term solution with long-term costs. When you suppress your needs, your boundaries, your instincts, you suppress the very circuitry that keeps you alive and healthy. Your vagal tone, the strength of your parasympathetic response, begins to weaken. Your heart rate variability drops. Your stress hormones spike. Your immune function suffers. And all of this entire cascade of dysfunction is your body crying out for alignment. The brain craves congruence. It wants your external behavior to match your internal state. When you feel one thing and say another, the system perceives dissonance, and dissonance creates distress. Chronic niceness forces you to live in perpetual dissonance. You say yes when your gut screams no, and your brain has to work overtime to reconcile the lie. Over time, this leads to emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and even depression. Why? Because your sense of self gets lost in the performance. You don't know who you are anymore, only who others want you to be. This is not sustainable. And more importantly, it's not necessary. The nervous system is capable of change. Through neuroplasticity, we can rewire these patterns. But first, we must name them. We must understand that niceness is not always goodness. That silence is not always strength. That self-sacrifice is not always virtue. Sometimes it's fear. And that fear is living in the tissues, in the breath, in the posture. It's not just psychological, it's physiological, and it can be transformed. The first step is awareness. Noticing the moments when you're about to say yes out of obligation instead of alignment. Catching the micro moments when your body contracts before your mouth smiles. Noticing the shallow breath, the clenched jaw, the racing thoughts. These are signals not of weakness, but of misalignment. They are your nervous system telling you that a deeper truth is being ignored. The second step is regulation. Breathing into the discomfort instead of bypassing it. Creating space between the stimulus and the response. Grounding your body so your choices are no longer fear-based. This is where practices like diaphragmatic breathing, cold exposure, or even mindful stillness can be game changers. They teach your system that discomfort can be survived, that you don't have to flee or fawn or fake your way through it. You can stay, you can feel, you can speak. And the third step is expression, saying what's true, even if your voice shakes. Holding boundaries, even if others don't like it. Letting go of the compulsive need to be liked, and replacing it with a deeper commitment to being whole. This doesn't mean becoming rude, cold, or dismissive. It means becoming real. It means choosing self-respect over self-erasure. It means letting your nervous system finally learn that authenticity is not a threat, it's a requirement for thriving. As this rewiring takes place, something powerful happens. Your brain begins to trust you again. Your body relaxes into its natural rhythms. Your relationships become more honest, even if they become fewer. You start to attract people who respect your truth, not just your utility. You stop feeling exhausted all the time because you're no longer leaking energy through performance. You stop living for approval because you've returned to alignment. And alignment is what regulates your system at the deepest level. Chronic niceness may feel like safety, but it's not. It's a short-term adaptation to long-term misattunement. And unless you intervene, it will continue to cost you. Not just emotionally, but biologically, because your brain and body are not separate from your behavior. They are shaped by it. Every time you betray your truth, your nervous system takes the hit. And every time you honor it, it begins to heal. This healing is not instant. It's gradual. It's built through repetition, through discomfort, through courage. But it is possible. And it is worth it. Because life is too short to live inside a mask, too precious to waste on false harmony, too sacred to sacrifice for the fleeting comfort of being liked. The world does not need more nice people. It needs regulated people, embodied people, honest people, people whose nervous systems are no longer hijacked by fear of disapproval, people who speak with clarity, love with boundaries, and live with presence. You can become that person. You are always capable. The wiring may be old, but it's not permanent. So if you spent your life being nice at the expense of being real, understand this: you're not broken. You're patterned. And patterns can change. The first act of change is truth. And truth begins not with others, but with yourself. Most people think boundaries are just about saying no. They think it's about pushing others away, putting up walls, or becoming difficult to deal with. But boundaries are not about rejection or rebellion. They are about regulation. They are about integrity. And at their core, they are about your brain, how it forms identity, how it manages emotion, how it maintains stability in a chaotic world. Boundaries are not just social tools. They are neurological necessities. When you lack boundaries, your brain is forced into a chronic state of hypervigilance. It can't predict what's coming next because it doesn't know where you end and the world begins. You constantly absorb the emotions, expectations, and energy of others. You find yourself saying yes when your gut says no, tolerating discomfort to keep others comfortable, losing sleep over decisions that should have been simple. And in the process, your identity becomes blurred. You stop knowing what you want, what you need, who you are. The human brain thrives on clarity. It is built to categorize, to differentiate, to define. That's why we experience emotional relief when we name a feeling, or physical comfort when we enter familiar environments. Predictability calms the nervous system. Ambiguity does the opposite. So when you have no boundaries, when everything is negotiable, when your time, energy, and attention are constantly up for grabs, you are signaling to your brain that nothing is safe. and your brain responds accordingly. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, begins to tire. It has to process more input than it should. Decision fatigue sets in. Emotional regulation becomes harder. Your default mode network, the system that constructs your sense of self, gets disrupted. You start overthinking, you start ruminating, you start reacting instead of responding. All because the lack of boundaries creates chaos in the very circuitry that governs clarity. But when you set a boundary, even a small one, the opposite happens. Your brain finds structure. Your nervous system finds calm. You take control of your inner space. And that act one that might seem small on the surface is biologically profound. Saying no when you mean no instead of yes activates the medial prefrontal cortex, the region associated with self-reference and identity. You're literally strengthening the neural pathways that say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I do not allow. In other words, boundaries are a training ground for identity. Every time you assert one, you reinforce the architecture of self. You teach your brain that your values matter, that your needs are valid, and that safety does not come from pleasing others, it comes from honoring yourself. Over time, this consistent behavior builds a stable neural pattern. Your brain learns that your internal world deserves protection. And when your brain believes that, your entire system begins to shift. Your stress levels drop. Your heart rate variability improves. Your sleep deepens. Your focus sharpens because the energy that used to be spent managing other people's reactions is now redirected toward building your own foundation. This is not theory. It's biology. It's neuroscience, and it's powerfully transformative, but the resistance is real. Many people avoid boundaries not because they don't want them, but because they've been trained to fear them. If you were raised in an environment where boundaries were punished, where saying no was met with anger or withdrawal, your nervous system learned to associate boundaries with danger. If being assertive got you labeled difficult, selfish, or ungrateful, your brain began to equate compliance with safety. And now, even as an adult, you may find yourself hesitating not because you lack the words, but because your body remembers the cost. This is where compassion meets science. Understanding your wiring doesn't excuse your patterns, but it explains them. And once something is explained, it can be restructured. The brain is neuroplastic. It changes based on experience. So even if you've spent years without boundaries, you can start building them today. Not in giant, dramatic acts of defiance, but in quiet, consistent decisions. You start by noticing. Where are you saying yes out of fear? Where are you overextending to earn approval? Where are you abandoning yourself for peace? Then you begin to respond differently. You pause before agreeing. You take space before reacting. You practice tolerating the discomfort that comes with doing things differently. Because discomfort is not danger, it's data. It's your nervous system recalibrating. At first, it may feel like guilt, like anxiety, like unfamiliarity. That's normal. That's rewiring in progress. The discomfort isn't a sign to stop. It's a sign to keep going. And as you keep going, something remarkable begins to happen. The people who only loved your compliance begin to fade. The people who thrive in your authenticity begin to arrive. You stop attracting chaos because your nervous system no longer matches it. You stop fearing rejection because you stopped rejecting yourself. Your relationships become healthier, not necessarily easier, but more honest, more grounded, more mutual. Boundaries also teach the brain discernment. When you protect your time, your brain learns that time matters. When you protect your energy, your brain learns that energy is finite. When you protect your space, your brain learns that not everyone deserves access. This is how you train the system to prioritize, not through discipline alone, but through clear, repeated signals. Your boundary is a signal. It's your brain's way of saying, I am not everything to everyone. I have limits. And in those limits, I find my power. This doesn't mean becoming rigid. True boundaries are not walls. They're doors you choose when to open, how wide, and to whom. Boundary is a signal. It's your brain's way of saying, I am not everything to everyone. I have limits. And in those limits, I find my power. This doesn't mean becoming rigid. True boundaries are not walls. They're doors you choose when to open, how wide, and to whom. Flexibility is healthy, but flexibility without a frame is chaos. You don't have to justify your boundaries to everyone. You don't need elaborate explanations. A simple no is a complete sentence. A clear this doesn't work for me is a valid decision. You don't owe others your exhaustion just because they're uncomfortable with your clarity. In fact, the people who get most upset by your boundaries are often the ones who benefited most from your lack of them. That's not your responsibility to fix. It's your opportunity to heal. Because your brain cannot thrive in a constant state of ambiguity. It needs you to take a stand. Not for the sake of confrontation, but for the sake of coherence. The more coherent your inner and outer world become, the stronger your identity grows. And the stronger your identity, the more stable your nervous system becomes. This is how you move from people-pleasing to presence, from overthinking to alignment, from survival to sovereignty. Your boundaries are not selfish. They're sacred. They are how you communicate with your own biology. They are how you teach your brain that safety is your brain like night that come from being liked. It comes from being whole. Some people won't like it. That's okay. The goal is not to be universally accepted. The goal is to be internally aligned, and alignment requires clarity. Clarity requires courage. Courage requires practice. Practice builds patterns, and patterns build a person one who is no longer ruled by fear or fatigue, but guided by truth and strength. You don't need to announce your boundaries to the world. You need to embody them through action, through choice, through behavior. You don't need permission. You need repetition, because repetition is what rewires the brain. The more you practice saying what you mean and meaning what you say, the more fluent you become in your own identity. The neural pathways get stronger. The self-talk gets clearer. The noise quiets down. Boundaries are not just about protecting your life, they are about directing it. Every time you say no to what's not aligned, you say yes to what is. You free up space in your brain. You free up time in your day, you free up energy in your system, and in that space you find creativity. You find clarity. You find self-trust. The things you've been chasing through performance and perfectionism start coming naturally because you've stopped leaking power. You've stopped outsourcing safety. You've come home to yourself. And from that place, you no longer beg for respect. You embody it. You no longer explain your worth. You own it. You no longer fear disconnection because you've connected to the one person who was missing all along, yourself. There's a deep, often unspoken drive inside many people to be liked. It's wired into our biology. As social creatures, the brain associates being liked with survival. It links inclusion with safety. From an evolutionary perspective, rejection from the tribe used to mean isolation and ultimately death. So it makes sense that being liked feels good. It lights up the brain's reward centers. It brings short-term comfort, dopamine hits, and emotional ease. But the problem is being liked and being respected are not the same. And in the long run, one builds your life. The other builds a mask. When you chase being liked, you mold yourself to fit into the perceptions and preferences of others. You minimize your opinions. You suppress your needs. You become adaptable, sometimes excessively so. And over time, the brain starts to rewrite its own identity too. Match external feedback. You laugh when things aren't funny. You say yes when everything inside says no. You accept mistreatment to avoid conflict. You tolerate disrespect to maintain harmony. And every time you do this, the brain files away a quiet message: your truth is not important. Your boundaries are optional. Your worth is conditional, but respect functions differently. Respect is not based on comfort, it's based on consistency. Respect is earned through alignment between what you say and what you do. It is built on clarity, not compliance. It is built on standards, not softness. The brain, when operating in integrity, respects what is firm, honest, and reliable. And when people see that you honor your own time, speak with directness, and follow through on commitments. Now, the shift from being liked to being respected doesn't come without resistance. If you've built your life on the scaffolding of approval, then changing course will trigger discomfort not just in others, but in you. You may lose people who only liked the version of you that served their needs. You may face pushback from those who benefited from your silence. Your own body may feel uneasy because it's addicted to the feedback loop of smiles, nods, and temporary harmony. But that unease is not danger. It's neuroplasticity in motion. It's your nervous system recalibrating to a new set of rules. You'll have moments where you feel tempted to revert, to soften a boundary, dilute a truth, or perform a version of yourself that people find easier to digest. But every time you resist that temptation, you reinforce a new identity. You create stronger synaptic connections between your values and your behavior. You become a person whose self-concept isn't outsourced to the crowd. And that stability, biologically speaking, is a cornerstone of resilience, because a stable identity protects you from burnout, decision fatigue, and chronic emotional volatility. Being respected also leads to higher quality relationships. Not necessarily more relationships, but better ones. When you are respected, people are more likely to be honest with you. They're more likely to take your time seriously. They're more likely to communicate directly instead of manipulating. The relationship becomes about mutual growth, not mutual performance. You stop attracting people who see you as a resource to exploit and start connecting with those who see you as a whole person to engage with. And that shift changes the entire ecosystem of your life. In professional environments, this is critical. People who are liked often become the go-to for tasks that others don't want to do. They're easy to lean on, easy to interrupt, easy to overlook. But people who are respected are consulted for input, included in decision-making, and recognized for their contributions. They don't just exist in the room, they have weight in the room. And that's because respect commands presence. It creates gravitational pull. And that presence is what the brain eventually associates with trustworthiness, not charisma, not charm, but consistency. This isn't about becoming aggressive. It's about being anchored. You don't need to raise your voice to be respected. You need to raise your standards. You don't need to dominate others. You need to demonstrate that you are not easily moved by emotional storms or social pressure. Because when people see that you can hold your ground, even when it's hard, they begin to value your presence differently. You're no longer someone they expect to fold. You become someone they look to for guidance, stability, and truth. Being liked might get you through the door, but respect is what keeps you at the table. Liking is about fitting in. Respect is about standing out. Liking is reactive. Respect is earned. And when you stop prioritizing being liked, you finally free yourself from the invisible chains that have kept your potential suppressed. You stop editing yourself in real time. You stop performing and you start living. Not for applause, but for alignment. And when your life becomes aligned, you find peace, not the superficial peace that comes from being accepted, but the deep, grounded peace that comes from knowing who you are and not compromising it. That peace doesn't waver when someone disapproves. It doesn't crumble when someone criticizes, because it's not built on their perception. It's built on your principles. And the brain, once it has tasted that kind of peace, begins to crave it more than praise. Over time, people might not always describe you as nice, but they'll describe you as solid, as direct, as someone who can be trusted. They may not always agree with you, but they will think twice before dismissing you, because your presence carries a weight that only integrity can produce. And that weight creates impact. You weren't born to be everyone's favorite. You were born to be honest, clear, anchored. When you give up the game of being liked, you start playing a different game, a game where the prize is self-respect. And when that's your prize, you stop playing by anyone else's rules. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is the signal. It is the biological indicator that your nervous system is entering unfamiliar territory. And while the common response is to retreat, to avoid, to distract, to soothe, those who understand how the brain works take a different approach. They lean into the discomfort, not recklessly, but intentionally. Because controlled exposure to discomfort is how the brain wires itself. It is how new patterns are installed. It is how change becomes permanent. The brain is designed for efficiency. Its default wiring is survival, not growth, and survival loves the familiar. Familiarity is predictable, and the brain finds safety in what it knows, even if what it knows is unhealthy, limiting, or destructive. That's why people stay in toxic environments. That's why they repeat patterns they claim to hate. Because the neural circuitry for those behaviors is well established. It's easy to run the loop. There's no resistance. But growth demands resistance. Transformation requires friction. And that friction is felt in the form of discomfort. When you deliberately place yourself in controlled discomfort, whether it's initiating a difficult conversation, setting a new boundary, waking up early, confronting a fear, or withholding a habitual response, you are creating what neuroscientists call a prediction error. The brain expected a certain outcome, but you did something different. That error forces the brain to pay attention. It activates heightened states of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and form new connections. That moment of tension, if repeated, under safe but challenging conditions, becomes the soil in which a new identity is built. This is not theoretical, it's measurable. When the brain encounters stress that is just beyond the comfort zone but not so overwhelming that it triggers collapse, certain neuromodulators are released: dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. These chemicals sharpen focus, increase learning capacity, and tag the experience as important. Over time and through repetition, this exposure carves new neural pathways, and those new pathways become the foundation of new behaviors, new habits, and new ways of thinking. But here's the problem: most people avoid this process. They misread discomfort as danger. They confuse nervousness with incapability. They label temporary anxiety as a permanent limit. And so they stay inside the perimeter of what feels safe, even if that perimeter becomes a prison. The key is understanding the distinction between distress and eustress. Distress overwhelms. It paralyzes. But eustress, the kind of discomfort that challenges without breaking, is what forces adaptation. Just like a muscle grows under progressive load, the brain strengthens through progressive discomfort. Think about cold exposure. The first time you step in an ice bath or cold shower, the brain panics. Heart rate spikes. Breathing becomes shallow, but if you regulate your breathing, anchor your mind, and push past the initial shock, something incredible happens. The prefrontal cortex regains control. The amygdala's response weakens. And the next time you enter the same environment, the discomfort remains, but your brain is different. It's less reactive, more stable. You've trained it not through theory, but through practice. That is the core of neuroadaptation. The same principle applies to social discomfort. If you've spent years avoiding confrontation, the first time you speak your truth, your body may tremble, your voice may shake, your mind may race. But if you speak anyway, if you hold your ground, even while feeling everything in you scream to retreat, you're teaching your brain something new. You're saying, I can survive this, I can hold tension, I can be misunderstood and still stand firm. That experience gets logged. And the more often you do it, the less terrifying it becomes. Not because the world changes, but because your response does. Controlled discomfort is a tool. It's a training protocol. And like any tool, it must be used with precision. Too much discomfort too fast and you'll trigger collapse. Too little and nothing changes. But just enough and repeated consistently and you unlock growth that no amount of passive thinking can create. This is not about masochism, it's about mastery. It's about choosing discomfort on purpose so that life's discomforts don't dominate you. This kind of training requires honesty. You have to ask, where am I avoiding? What conversations do I keep postponing? What feedback do I refuse to hear? What opportunities do I reject because I'm afraid to be seen, to fail, to be judged? Wherever avoidance lives, your potential is buried underneath it. And the only way to reclaim that potential is through deliberate, repeated exposure to what you fear. Not to prove anything to others, but to rewire your brain's understanding of safety and identity. There's a term in neuroscience called graded exposure. It's used in therapy to treat phobias and trauma. Instead of confronting the most terrifying version of the fear all at once, the individual is gradually exposed to increasing levels of challenge. Each step is uncomfortable but manageable, and each successful exposure rewrites the brain's map of what's dangerous. Over time, the fear diminishes, the power returns. The same process can be applied to personal growth. Start small, build the muscle. Take on greater challenges as the brain adapts. Neuroplasticity is not a mystical force. It is a biological fact, but it doesn't activate through ease. It activates through struggle, through novelty, through challenge. And when you deliberately place yourself in positions that stretch your tolerance, you are not weakening yourself, you are forging resilience. You are inoculating yourself against fragility. You are teaching the brain, we don't run from discomfort, we lead with it. Every time you endure a controlled hardship, fasting, physical strain, solitude, cold, difficult feedback, uncomfortable silence, you increase your capacity. And the brain learns that pain is not a threat, but a teacher. That discomfort is not a sign to stop, but a signal to focus. This changes everything. Because once discomfort no longer holds you hostage, you become limitless. Not because the fear disappears, but because it no longer dictates your behavior. Controlled discomfort also brings clarity. When you stretch yourself, your values become visible. You find out what matters. You discover what you're willing to suffer for. And that kind of